Welcome to the Gary Null Show, a program designed to enhance mental, physical, and spiritual well-being through science and the wisdom of the ages. Let us take you on a journey of empowerment. Sit back, relax, and get ready to change your life for good.
With only 148 Americans officially killed in action and only 467 wounded, ours seemed to be a shining victory in the Gulf. But this victory has lost its glow somewhat now that we know that tens of thousands of our Gulf-serviced people have become sick from a mysterious, debilitating, and sometimes deadly syndrome. The Department of Veterans Affairs has reported that approximately 6,000 soldiers have died since the war's conclusion, including 1,300 18 to 24-year-olds who were in perfect health prior to the war, but who mysteriously contracted various forms of cancer after their involvement with the military.
The British veterans are in an even more difficult position than American veterans in some ways because there's no Freedom of Information Act. And currently, British veterans are being told that they cannot have their own vaccination records. So I ask, how can they then possibly expect to receive proper medical attention when vaccination records are always necessary for a doctor to understand exactly what could be causing an illness?
The dilemma of the soldier on active duty is that by coming forward, he risks losing his job, his health care, his family's health care, and his retirement. So you have this great downward pressure for them not to come forward. The problem with that is that we may have soldiers who are not 100% still on active duty concealing their illnesses as a result of their service in the Gulf. Not because they want to conceal it, but because the military won't recognize these illnesses as a result of their service, and that their only option is to be forced out for not being capable of performing their duties.
I also think that some people who are ill are not admitting that they're ill. There's huge denial. This is my opinion. I find huge denial in many veterans, and I put it to object relations theory, love of country, and the government as bad parent object.
How extensive is the cover-up? The Regal report essentially accuses the Department of Defense of lying to the American public and condemns it for abandoning the servicemen who were willing to die for their country. Senator Regal referred to the heartlessness and irresponsibility of the military bureaucracy, concluding there is no more serious crime than a cover-up of facts that could facilitate the diagnosis and treatment of sick U.S. veterans.
We need much more candor from the DoD and the VA and the CIA, a lot more candor. And it's gotten to the point now where this may sound a bit harsh, but some heads need to roll, because I really believe that all three, to various degrees, have participated in a cover-up that has resulted in the bad health of many of our heroes who served there, and has resulted in the death of some of them. And the longer it takes for us to resolve this issue and unravel this puzzle and solve this mystery, the more illnesses we're going to see and the more deaths we're going to see. So we're at that point now where it's almost criminal, the lack of cooperation we've received from various government agencies.
Well, we clearly have a state of denial underway on the part of most of the executive branch. The Pentagon doesn't want to deal with this for a lot of political reasons and military reasons. If they have to admit that they exposed 250,000 of their own troops as a result of bombing these facilities, Desert Storm is no longer this quick, clean win that Colin Powell has tried to make it out to be. Secondly, if they have to admit that the Iraqis actually used these weapons even once, we didn't respond to that. It means deterrence failed. And is that going to embolden a Kim Jong-il in Korea or a Muammar Gaddafi in Libya or some of these other third world lunatics, essentially, that have got these kinds of weapons programs? Yes, it would, no doubt about it. And then there's another aspect of this that I think is really, really very, very corrosive, and that is the money issue. I don't think the federal government wants to spend the money to help these people. I think that's what a lot of this really boils down to. If you have to actually pay out a lot of benefits to these veterans in a very tight budget environment, you're going to increase the deficit. I don't think there's any way of getting around it. Clinton doesn't want to do that. The Republicans don't want to deal with that. And I think that's why Gulf War veterans are continuing to fall through the cracks in that respect. It's a big money issue, and they don't want to deal with it.
I think it would be much easier if they would just come out and tell us the truth. You know, neither John nor I are asking for monetary assistance. We don't receive any. We don't receive disability, neither he nor I. All we want is to get John better, to get me better. If they would just tell the truth, so we know how to treat it, so we know how to diagnose it. Cover up, yes. I do think there's a cover up.
Although the Gulf War syndrome sickness issue has been raised time and time again and has in fact elicited a response from the military, come back in, we will test you again. Nevertheless, there are no answers forthcoming, and in fact, no documentation for the most part. So we're faced with a situation of sick people, now also wives and children, as well as the members of the military themselves, who go in and have blood drawn, wait upon test results coming back, so with the hope that they can finally know what's wrong with them, only to be told that nothing was found. And when they ask for a hard copy of the lab results, it's not forthcoming. These blood tests are taken over and over and over again. What are they doing with all this blood? Where is it? Where are these hard copy test results? Another type of testing that appears to be going on is spinal taps. As one example, a vet who's very ill, with whom I'm familiar and speak quite frequently, has now had 28 spinal taps done and was scheduled for a 29th. What is this about? Why are spinal taps being taken? It obviously is not helping him regarding any sort of evaluation as to what's wrong with him. He continues to worsen. What sort of readings might they be taking from these spinal taps?
Well, as far as the veterans are concerned, I think that a lot of the private medical research that's currently underway is going to help give us the solution to a lot of these medical problems that the veterans are suffering from. As far as holding officials accountable, in large measure, that's going to be up to the Congress of the United States. The big question that I have right now is, are they going to step up to the plate, issue subpoenas, hold meaningful hearings that will really do something to hold people accountable? Because there have been some criminal acts committed in all of this. Trying to reclassify information is a criminal act. Trying to intimidate veterans into silence, which the Pentagon has done, is a criminal act. That needs to be prosecuted, and the people responsible for it need to go to jail.
I helped stamp and sign close to 1,000 medical records documenting those anthrax vaccines. In many cases, they're not there now. People have no proof that they ever got those vaccines. And you ask me if there's a cover-up? Nah, no cover-up. Right. It just doesn't make sense to me. Those kinds of things that I saw there as a healthcare provider, I mean, if I tampered with a medical record in the state of Delaware, I could lose my license, go to jail, be civilly sued. I mean, I could be hung out to dry. But somebody else tampers with medical records and it's okay? That just doesn't make sense to me. I personally did those things. I made those databases. I helped do those medical records. And where are they? I don't know. Those are the kinds of things that I saw over there. I know what I did. My memory's not that bad.
Unfortunately, I do feel there has been a cover-up in the Gulf War issue. I think particularly there needs to be a full investigation into the NIH Manhattan Project and into vaccinations. I think there needs to be more testing and more research on biological and chemical use too.
The U.S. was a participant in the Geneva Biological Weapons Convention of 1972, and we, as well as Iraq, signed the resultant agreement that prohibited both experimentation with and the sale of biologicals or weapons of mass destruction. Now, obviously, our government has a considerable interest in keeping the U.S. breach of this agreement covered up. Plus, there's the inconvenient fact of our history of cooperation with Saddam Hussein, a tyrant who was denounced by the global community and likened Adolf Hitler. Embarrassment about revealing our past dealings with our current enemy has hampered our government's readiness to deal fairly with veterans.
Once we had begun that investigation, the Pentagon immediately reacted negatively to what we had to say. And although the evidence seemed to be overwhelming that this did occur, the Pentagon began to take an intransigent position. We then started requesting records, logs, documents, and evidence of exports of materials that might indicate U.S. involvement in arming Iraq and that these exposures may have occurred. Over the next 6 months or so, the number of people on the Gulf War Registry from both the veterans community and from the active duty community multiplied almost fivefold. We also started getting responses from the Pentagon indicating that there were no records that indicated that there were any detections of or any exposures to chemical agents. And we knew at that point that they were lying because we had documents in hand that we had gotten from many sources that indicated that these did in fact occur. In fact, there were public press accounts that detections had occurred, that both the Czechs and the French had detected chemical agents, and that many of these agents were being attributed to the fallout from the bombing of the Iraqi chemical weapons research, production, and storage infrastructure. During the committee investigation, we held hearings during which Pentagon officials again deliberately misled Congress under oath about the nature of the exposures that the veterans sustained. And in May of 1994, we actually received a letter from the Secretary of Defense, Health and Human Services, and Department of Veterans Affairs indicating that there was no information, classified or unclassified, indicating any detections of or exposures to chemical agents. We now know that that information was all false and that these people intentionally misled Congress on this issue.
In front of the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee, General Schwarzkopf publicly stated that he had no knowledge at that time or to the present when he was interviewed by the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee of PFC David Allen Fisher's contamination or injury. This document from the 7th Corps After Action Reports states specifically that yes, he did know, and his feeling was, it's only one person, so don't make anything big out of it. There should have been preparations ahead of time, and definitely there should have been a different reaction other than, oh well.
I accept nothing at face value from the DOD, the VA, the CIA, and even the Department of Energy, which really hasn't come before our committee, because they have done nothing to make me feel that when they testify before us, what they say is credible. So I always assume that we're only learning part of the story.
They're rewriting history. That's the bottom line. They're taking what actually occurred and they're making a policy decision. Their policy is, we don't admit it, it doesn't exist. Until DOD admits that it did actually happen, they don't have to do anything about it. The problem that they've got right now is if they admit that those chemical alarms were set off by fallout that made it all the way down to Saudi Arabia, they will have to admit that they messed up on the bombing raids, that their planning totally flopped, that they didn't take into account certain crucial elements that were so basic to the entire thing that it was a no-brainer. They should have known this. And their documentation proves that they actually did know this, they just disregarded it.
The fact is, they underestimated the nature of the threat during the war. They were ill prepared to deal with the issue of low-level chemical agent fallout. They were ill prepared to deal with the preventive medicine measures necessary to prevent our soldiers from getting sick as a result of their exposures. And they were ill prepared to conduct the investigations afterwards. The military is not a good arbiter of the health of American citizens. We have health agencies, we have research institutes, we have foundations and universities that do this kind of research on a daily basis. Our veterans get the leftovers, people with the bureaucratic agendas, people who are trying to defend their past positions, rather than the best available medical science that every other disease in this country gets.
I wouldn't even be so upset if they would just come forward and say, well, yeah, we gave you all this stuff. We really thought we were trying to help, and it didn't, and we're really sorry. So now what can we do? Let's try and treat it. Just tell me that you screwed up. Just tell me that you messed it up somehow. People just don't lie to me. I wasn't a child when you sent me over there. I'm certainly not a child now. And something has happened to me, something that has changed me irrevocably, and nobody will meet my eye on it from this government, and that really upsets me.
How much longer can the White House, the Pentagon, the Veterans Administration, the CIA, and other agencies responsible for helping these veterans be able to deny the truth?
Here's where you can make a difference. Not on my watch are we going to let something like this happen. Clearly something happened. And to see, in essence, the stonewalling by both the CIA as well as the Pentagon, I give a lot of credit, and I talk to my colleagues, Chris Shays and other Republicans and Democrats helping to lead the charge. We've at least put a foot in the door. And we've gotten them now to admit some things that I don't think a couple years ago they denied. But we have to continue. We can't let them just sweep this thing under the rug.
I feel that the Pentagon should be held responsible, and they should have some criminal war suits against the Pentagon. President Bush, all the generals that exposed the soldiers to these chemicals and toxins without warning us, using a weapon on us without knowing the full effects of it. I really feel that the Pentagon should be held socially responsible to take care of these soldiers and the people that this weapon has affected. And the Iraqi people are suffering from the radioactive material that's still in their land, and someone needs to be socially accountable for cleanup in that country. We've cleaned up foreign countries. We've cleaned up Vietnam. We cleaned up Japan. We've helped clean up Germany. Why can't we help clean up Iraq? Because these people are still suffering from radioactive material that has a life of 4.1 billion years, a half-life. And someone needs to be socially accountable for what happened over there, the weapons that we used.
I think that there are certain members of the Presidential Advisory Committee who truly do understand that there is a real problem here, not just a medical problem, but a legal and a political problem. And they have tried to have as much of an impact on the process as they can. But this panel has been controlled by a group of individuals who, quite frankly, have sought to try to play down the problem and make the problem go away. It's not going to go away. And in the end, I think that history is going to judge that this panel was just another one of those Washington blue ribbon style panels that administrations use to try to make unpleasant problems go away. But this one will not go away.
The inadequacy of this committee is giving some incentive to Congress to do more than just talk about this issue. That's all we've heard from Congress thus far. Minor pieces of legislation, a presumption of exposure to a disease that the VA claims doesn't exist, and lip service saying that we're doing everything we can while at the same time doing absolutely nothing. What we need now is for the research, for the diagnostics, and for the cause and effect relationship investigations to be taken away from those who have lied to Congress repeatedly about this issue.
As one of the loudest lobbying voices in Washington, D.C. right now, it might be damaging to some of their careers because there's just too many of us. 700,000 of us went overseas, 225,000 are claiming illnesses. All of those veterans have family members. And if Congress can consider one veteran 3 votes, we can consider one veteran 3 family members that's going to cry and whine and complain and fight and kick and scratch, testify, do interviews, whatever it takes to get this story out there and keep it in the mainstream until we get justification.
The longer that it takes to get the government to properly address this issue, warts and all, the more veterans will die, the more who will become chronically ill. I, for one, would not like to see any grandchild of mine be sent off to some future war to be subjected to something like this again, where upon returning, their own government doesn't do what it should do.
I sent those soldiers to the Persian Gulf. I voted to confront Saddam Hussein, get him out of Kuwait, not allow him to control nearly 50% of the world's oil, and amass an incredible military machine. I felt very right then when I voted to send our troops there, and I feel right now. But I have this aching heart that the soldiers I sent were not treated properly in terms of their potential exposure, and clearly not treated properly once they came home. And I have a hard time living with that.
We have gotten the VA now to, I think, 9 laws from when we started this have been passed to better the veterans' lives. And a landmark decision was when the VA decided to give compensation and pension to undiagnosed illnesses. That had never, ever happened in the history of the VA before, and that was very rewarding for us. It's just been a long road. It's a never-ending road so far. A lot of us cannot see the end of this road, and we don't know if we will see the end of this road. And for many, the end of the road came when they died.
I served proudly. I felt I was serving my country. I felt I was defending my country. I would fight for the American people. I would fight for the human rights. I would fight for freedom, but knowing what the Department of Defense has done to us, I wouldn't fight for the Department of Defense. I feel that the Department of Defense, it's kind of like uses people as guinea pigs in experimentations, and then they don't want to accept any of the responsibility to take care of us.
As I say, this is a transition that is very hard. And I hope I do it with grace.
It's not possible in a short period of time to tell an entire story, not one that spans nearly a decade and hundreds of thousands of lives. But it's a beginning. For all the Gulf War veterans and their families and those who've tried to help them, hopefully this program will be one step further in trying to open up the door of secrecy that has occurred around this entire phenomena. I'm Gary Null. Thank you very much for watching.
Mm-hmm.